around 2022, 2023, we started hearing from a lot of our clients and admissions offices that they had the feeling that oftentimes state politics, maybe campus politics, are starting to play more of a role in students' decision about whether or not to attend their college. It was sort of a hunch or maybe a few anecdotes, but we had one client said, hey, guys, I can point to no less than 50 students who have explicitly said your state's politics are the main thing that's preventing me from going to your school. Love your school, but I can't stomach your state's politics.
Hey, welcome to the Higher Ed Storytelling University podcast on the EdUp Experience Podcast Network. This is a show dedicated to helping higher ed marketers tell better stories, create better content, and enroll more students. My name's John Azzoni. I'm the founder at Unveiled, and we're a video production company working specifically with college marketing teams to make it easy for them to scale up and even automate their student and alumni success stories through our subscription approach. And you can learn more about that at unveiled.tv. And that's UNVEILD.tv. If you're listening to this podcast for the first time, go ahead and subscribe. We'd love to have you. And if you're wanting your college and university's content to resonate on a deeper emotional level with prospective students, with alumni, with parents, whatever, I want you to subscribe to my free newsletter. Every week I send out tips and insights on creating more emotionally resonant content, including examples and best practices from other institutions, articles and blog posts, that week's podcast episode, and much more. So head over to unveiled.tv/newsletter and sign up. All right, let's get on with the show. My guest today is Jarrett Smith. Jarrett is the Senior Vice President of Strategy at Echo Delta, an education marketing agency solving higher ed's most pressing marketing problems with strategies designed for success. And today we're talking about if and how politics affect a student's decision, where to go to school, what that means for content creation efforts. I think you guessed we'll probably talk more about how, if it were if it does, and you were just like, no, it doesn't really, then that would be like a very short episode. All right, thank you, Jarrett.
Yeah, good show, good talk.
Yeah. All right, well, Jarrett, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, John. I'm a big fan of your podcast, and it's a lot of fun to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. So you were one of my earlier higher ed connections from a few years ago. Just for context for people listening, for people that know the podcast, you've heard my spiel about our storytelling subscriptions. And the first university or college that I worked with, they were ready to buy into this, and they were like, well, you got to get past Echo Delta first. She's like, if they approve you, then you're good. And then I think that's where we met, was on a meeting with your whole team, and then that was our first subscription client. So
as I recall, that must have gone decently well because I'm on the podcast. So
yeah,
I think
yeah. Unless I have a whole smear campaign here.
Here's a takedown episode.
Yeah. But cool. So tell me something people would be surprised to know about you.
Oh man. Okay. So I'm going to be like super vulnerable here. I'm just going to embrace my inner Brene Brown, and I'm going to tell you something that not a lot of people know about me. So I am probably the only person who is presented at AMA Higher Ed who is also a card-carrying member of the Florida Taxidermy Association. So
really,
I am not a practicing taxidermist, just for the record. You can chalk this one up to hobbies that your kids take up that you never thought your kids would take up. So we did, yes, in pursuit of that very unique interest for one of my boys, we attended the Florida Taxidermy Association annual conference, which was actually super entertaining, incredibly interesting. And as part of that, became formal members. So here we are.
So what kind of animals do you taxiderm?
Well, okay. So I don't personally partake in the taxidermization of animals, but no, at this conference, they had all sorts of animals, exotic, big game, snakes and reptiles, and all sorts of, we live in Florida, so all sorts of Florida wildlife, hogs and turkeys and deer and bobcats and all sorts of stuff. And so my youngest son has an abiding interest from very young age in all things related to animals and reptiles,
Mm,
um and so yeah, so this was something he was like, I've seen this on YouTube and I think it would be really cool. Can we give it a shot? So at this point,
that's
I
cool.
may or may not have a number of frozen animals in my garage freezer right now.
Well, I'm glad they're animals and not another species in
I
your
know, and
freezer.
I want to reassure everybody he is like very well adjusted and just a very sweet and friendly kid.
That's how it starts, like cutting animal heads off, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So I think we're in the clear. Fingers crossed. We'll find out.
Yeah. So one of the last times I was in Florida, I was celebrating my best friend's 40th birthday party or 40th birthday. We went on like a deep sea fishing charter, and we caught a shark. And like it was clear that the guides or whatever had a business relationship with the taxidermy people that are responsible for like stuffing the or preserving the shark or whatever, because they were
Yeah,
selling this thing hard, and you could kind of sense that this was a whole act, like, oh my gosh, you caught a shark, like no one ever catches a
that's
shark.
incredible.
Oh my god, I can't believe this. And then they're like, yo, we gotta tag this is a no-brainer. They kept saying this is a no-brainer. It's like $3,000 to
Yeah,
you wouldn't like get the actual shark, like they do a replica of it, but they have to like tag it. But they were pushing hard to like, so we were just like, we were so amped, we didn't do the taxidermy thing, but we were like, holy crap, we caught a shark. And then we looked at reviews later, after when we were like out to lunch, and like other people were like, we caught a shark, we caught a shark. And then we're
that's
like,
awesome.
they probably just were like, release the shark, from under the
Yeah,
boat.
yep, yeah. As part of our Florida lifestyle, we do a lot of fishing, and I can assure you, we catch sharks like all the time. It's always
Yeah.
like, oh, great, we got another shark.
All right, well, now I'm convinced that we were just part of the act, but
Mhm,
it
mhm.
was a fun time. I don't have a taxidermied shark though.
Well,
So
life goals,
anyway,
bucket list.
yeah. But we're here to talk about politics. So well, first give us a primer on what Echo Delta is about. Just I know a lot of people are that listen to this podcast are probably aware of you guys, but for people who aren't, let us know.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Happy to chat about that briefly. So, Echo Delta is an enrollment marketing agency for higher education. Um, I think what makes us maybe a little bit different than other firms is that we uh, have a lot of the capabilities that you might expect from a much larger firm, but we sort of package it up in a more boutique, personalized, small team format. So I think it's a really good fit for clients that really value like a close collaborative agency partner that is really invested in their school. So we have all the creative services you'd expect from a sort of quote unquote typical agency. So brand and market research, media buying, recruitment campaigns, email content, web design, that sort of stuff. But we also combine that with some pretty high level enrollment consulting. So we've got a number of things that we bring to bear there that I think they're interesting. We have an amazing campus visit consulting practice headed up by Jeff Calais, who's incredible. Scott Rhodes heads up our financial aid leveraging, name buys, and strategic enrollment planning. And just this past year, we started offering sales training workshops for admissions counselors, and that's proven to be really popular. So I think it's really those combination of capabilities is a bit unusual. And again, kind of bringing that together in more of that small agency kind of format.
Cool. And you have a podcast, Higher Ed Marketing Lab.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, this is sort of my irregular podcast, John. I hand it to you. You're so consistent. I'm like doing good to squeak out a podcast once a month, um, but it's a lot of fun and I learn a lot on that. So we, like you, interview really smart folks from around higher ed, but also make a point to reach outside of higher ed and just to learn what we can from very smart, savvy individuals, usually in the world of marketing or research or business strategy or something like that, and then try and see what we can learn that we can apply for our higher education clients.
Cool. Good deal. Well, to make you feel better, I did go down to every other week releasing an episode. I was getting
Okay.
I was getting a little bogged down. It kept sneaking up on me where I'm like, crap, I don't have an episode lined up. And then I'd have to like hustle up and like write a solo episode, but that takes me a while because I can't just riff. Like I have to just like I have to write it
Yeah.
out, you know. So I was like, well, let me loosen up the reins a little bit and go to every other week. And now it's been great. I think this is the sweet spot.
Yeah.
Once a month
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
great though.
It would be, but I think, I mean, I aspire to every other week. That would be fantastic. It's a lot though, man. So respect.
Yeah. Quick break here to tell you about a thing that all the cool higher ed marketers are doing. They've all subscribed to the Higher Ed Storytellers Digest. It's my weekly email newsletter where I unpack practical tips, insights, and inspiration for creating more emotionally resonant content for their institutions. And guess what? I think you're cool, and I want you on the list. Past newsletters have featured stuff like the anatomy of viral content. What makes a piece of content spread like wildfire? Also, examples of really compelling user-generated video content coming out of other institutions and getting a lot of traction on YouTube. We've also talked about how emotional content isn't just being sappy all the time. There's a variety of emotions that your content can speak to that can inspire a prospective student to take the next step with your institution. And so we've unpacked that. We've shared exclusive mini podcast episodes and bonus content that you can't get anywhere else but the newsletter. We've shared workflow tips for using AI to aid in content creation, all kinds of stuff that we unpack in this newsletter. And on more than one occasion, I've treated my entire list to free Starbucks. I make no promises, but just saying, it's been done twice. You'll also stay up to date on the latest episodes from this podcast. So if email is a better way for you to subscribe to a podcast, this is the way. So head over to unveiled.tv/newsletter and sign up. And when you sign up, you'll be given immediate access to all the previous editions of the newsletter so you can binge the various topics that we've touched on and links and resources we've shared, all that stuff. So do that. Unveiled.tv/newsletter. Unveiled is spelled UNVEILD. Okay, back to the show. You guys did a report on politics and people's, prospective students' decision to go to school based on a state's politics. Tell us about that. Tell us about the report and why did you pursue this topic?
Sure. So I think it was probably around 2022, 2023. We started hearing from a lot of our clients and admissions offices that they had the feeling that oftentimes state politics, maybe campus politics, are starting to play more of a role in students' decision about whether or not to attend their college. And, and I think in a lot of cases, it was sort of a hunch or maybe a few anecdotes or kind of conversations maybe an admissions counselor had with some students that they were kind of prompting that. But we had one client located in the Southeast who said, hey, guys, I can point to no less than 50 students who have explicitly said your state's politics are the main thing that's preventing me from going to your school. Love your school, but I can't stomach your state's politics. So at that point, we said, gosh, this is a thing. There's something to it. And we just want to see if we can understand it better. And there've been a little bit of research done in this area, but not much. So we thought, hey, with an upcoming election cycle, this is probably going to become more important, not less important. Let's dive in and see what we can learn. So we partnered up with a longtime research partner of ours, ADV Market Research. Grant DeRue, their founder and lead researcher there, is amazing. And we've worked on a number of client projects. So we said, hey, let's partner up. Let's co-author a report. So we worked with ADV to develop a custom survey. We did a national sample that included 1,044 students around the country. These were all high school students, juniors and seniors who indicated that they had intended to enroll in a 4-year university after graduation. And we asked them just a broad range of questions. It kind of started with looking at their own political affiliation and sort of level of political activity. But then we asked a whole series of questions around the extent to which either state or campus politics was playing a role in their college choice. If it was, we asked them, okay, what are sort of your concerns? One of the things we wanted to understand was just like, what are the material concerns, the actual material concerns that students have, and what impact do they think this is potentially going to have on their college experience? We asked about their parents' political views and the extent to which they felt that that might influence their choice. Um, and we also asked questions around some interesting issues around free speech on campus, and also whether or not they felt that colleges should remain neutral on divisive political issues. And so we learned a lot in the report, and it was a really fun and interesting project.
Yeah, so tell me, like, what were some things that surprised you about, the findings here?
Yeah, so man, it is hard to narrow it down. I think with something that sweeping, there's like so many little interesting points of interest, if you will. But I think if you were to walk away just knowing a few things based off our research, I think it would be first and foremost just that yes, politics is a factor for most students most of the time. I think that's what our research shows. One way that we asked about that was we asked students, we said, hey, if the state's political climate differed significantly from your own views, would that be a factor in your decision? And about 64% of students said, yeah, if the college was located in a state where the political views of that state differed significantly from my own, that would definitely be a factor. And we also asked the same thing for the campus. So if you were considering a campus where the political views of that campus differed significantly from your own, would that be a factor in your decision? And 76% of students said, yes, that would be a factor in my decision. Um, for about 12% of students on either of those questions, so differing state politics or differing campus politics, about 12% of students said, I would not attend that college.
Hmm.
So it is sort of a make or break factor for those students. So I think that's sort of the first thing that I would point to. We did actually some interesting work, and Grant really worked with us to construct some interesting questions that allowed us to kind of estimate and quantify how much of the college decision does state and campus politics occupy. And what we found is that collectively it occupies about 20% of the college decision on average. So that puts it on par with things like financial aid and academic reputation and student life and that sort
Hmm.
of thing. So these more traditional choice factors. So
Yeah,
it is playing a role.
it's interesting because, like, when I was in college, I remember, it's just George W. Bush was president, and I mean, I went to art school, so traditionally pretty liberal leaning, so there was a lot of anti-Bush kind of stuff going on, but I don't remember it being as divisive as it is now, like with like specific hot button issues, and especially with
Hmm.
the like LGBTQ plus, that it was not nearly the same as it is now as a divisive, political issue. I don't remember it really being a political issue back then.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, and I just think about. I mean, I've never been like super into politics. Um, but and so like I guess I'm not the ideal case study, but I don't
Yeah.
I don't remember even thinking about politics, on where I was going to school. But now, seeing, some of these states with very um polarizing decisions that they've made or whatever, I can completely see how it's just a whole different world.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is a testament to how divisive and polarizing politics have worked their way into sort of every aspect of American life. And, I think it also coincides with sort of a dramatic loss in trust of institutions in general. And higher ed used to be one of those things that 20 years ago everybody could kind of agree on. And now it really has split in large part across political lines, and the value of higher ed has become debatable now. And so I
Yeah.
think uh, that definitely plays into it. And I think still a lot of high school students are not particularly politically energized, if you will, but you do absolutely have some that are. Our research shows that, and I think this aligns with what you would get from lots of other studies in this area, that young women in general tend to be more politically animated and aware than
Mm,
young men as a group. And I think part of that is that, when we look at the issues that are in front of us today, things like reproductive rights, which is front and center in our political debate, well,
yeah.
that is very salient to young women today, and not so much on the radar of a young man. It's not as personal in that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I wanted to back up real quick for people that want to before I forget to ask you, where can people get this report at?
Oh yeah, thanks for reminding me. That would be nice. Where could I actually read this thing? So if you go to echodelta.co/politics, you can download the report for free there. Simple registration, and we'll email it to you, and you can download it. It's about 50 pages long. There is a lot that we dive into there, so that'd be a great place to go. So echodelta.co/politics.
Okay, cool. All right. So now people can follow along if they want. What were some other takeaways that you and I talked about several of them on our pre-call, but just walk us through some other takeaways from the report.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that one of the things we wanted to understand was what are sort of the material concerns that students have, and so we asked them, and it turns out students have a wide range of concerns. The top three are number one, and again, just to put it in context, this is if you are attending college in a state or on a campus that differs significantly from your own political viewpoint. What are your concerns? So that's kind of the basic question that we asked. The top concern was uh, concerns for my own personal safety on campus. Second was a fear of not belonging, and then third was concern around harassment. And there were
Mm,
others though, and this was interesting. We did definitely see that uh, the likelihood of having concerns at all is really split along lines of political affiliation. So our left-leaning students, which about 30% of students in our survey, were far more likely to cite a wide range of concerns uh, when compared to moderate or conservative students. That's not to say that our moderate and conservative students didn't cite any concerns, just that our left leaning students were sort of more in tune with a wide range of concerns. So again, I think that's helpful if you're an enrollment leader, an admissions professional, and you're thinking about, okay, who are my students? What are their likely political affiliations? And our report really does a lot to kind of illuminate, I think, what some of those specific concerns might be, and would certainly be something that an institution could look at and say, like, hey, interesting. Okay, here's some jumping off points that we might explore with our own prospective students, and look into further and see if these kind of align with what our students say. Um, the other, another sort of interesting finding was that we did ask students specifically what states they were the most concerned about. And this was actually where we learned something surprising. So, but first, let me tell you what was not surprising. What was not surprising was that if you break it up by political affiliation, our right leaning students are primarily concerned with California and New York. Those were
mhm.
the states they were most likely to express concerns about. If you broke it up and looked, segment out our left leaning students, they pretty much have concerns about any red state, some
Mhm.
more than others, though. And this is where it got interesting. So, three red states stood out above all the rest, and it was Texas, Florida, and Alabama. Now, I think a little bit of that is context dependent because when we ran our survey, Alabama was sort of deep in some very controversial stuff around reproductive rights. And I think that was top
Mhm.
of mind for a lot of students answering our survey. But those three states were far and away the states where students had the most concerns. But here's where it gets interesting. It wasn't just our left leaning students that were concerned about these states, it was also our moderate students and some of our conservative students. So if you look at Texas in our report, what you'll see is that about 17% of moderate students were concerned about Texas, and about 10% of conservatives were concerned about Texas. So
Interesting.
that yeah, that
10%.
really kind of struck me. It was not what I was expecting. And so we were reflecting on this, and I think there's probably two things that are potentially going on there. The first is that I think, as always, when we're looking at research like this, we have to be careful not to assume that these groups are just perfectly homogenous, that all
Hmm.
conservative students think alike. It very well could be that, you know, uh, uh, some of our conservative students in the survey actually have what would be considered more, quote, liberal views on things like reproductive rights. And so maybe they have a concern with going to school in Texas. Um, so I think we have to be careful about uh, making assumptions about sort of the uniformity of belief there. The other thing I think is happening, though, is that I think for a lot of students, they just don't want divisive state politics or campus politics to be a major feature in
Yeah.
their college experience. And so, regardless of what that state's politics are, I just I just don't want it to really
Yeah.
interrupt the larger experience that I'm hoping to have on campus.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I think I totally get that. I mean, this, especially in those really more polarized states, I can imagine that's just like really just a huge topic of conversation that some people just wouldn't really
Yeah,
want.
absolutely. I mean, here in Florida, and I don't want to run afoul of our governor because it doesn't work well for folks. But when you think about in the state of Florida, with the public school system, the governor has taken a very active role, let's call it, in
Yeah.
shaping what
Yeah.
the politics of those institutions. And if you're a prospective student considering Florida public schools, or maybe any school in Florida, that might be, if you're fairly politically aware, that might be on your radar. I would guess that that's probably gotten a little better now that Florida's governor is no longer in the presidential race, and
Hmm.
things seem to have kind of died down a little bit. I imagine that this recruitment season is less of an issue than maybe last year when our governor was like in the headlines constantly. But I think it
Yeah.
certainly does give at least some students pause and something to work through.
It's like I heard one of two things about your governor, either about his politics or about his shoes.
Okay.
the Because like wasn't he like wearing like platforms or something like that?
I can neither confirm nor deny the platform shoes that our governor may or may not have been wearing.
We'll stay out
But
of
I
the
think I
weeds
saw
on that
that
one.
headline. Yeah, yeah. Again,
Or maybe
you're
I'm
putting
thinking of
me
a
in an
different governor.
John, you're putting me in an uncomfortable position here. Just don't ask questions you don't want answers to,
That's
okay?
yeah. Well, that's I'm gonna, investigative journalist. I'm after the truth here. So okay, so based on, these findings, we talk about content creation a lot on this podcast.
Mhm.
How would you advise schools in their content creation efforts? Like, what does all this mean for the Marcom leader that's interpreting this report?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, John. I think in typical consultant fashion, I'll just say it depends. I think it is very context dependent. So I think the starting place is to look at the prevailing political climate of your state, look at the prevailing political climate of your campus, such as it is, and to consider the profile of student that you're hoping to recruit and how they may feel about those two things, and really just asking the basic question of like, to what extent are these political climates serving us or not? Is there the possibility that some of our prospective students have some baggage with either our state or our campus's politics? Um, and if you think that baggage exists, our research shows kind of gives you a starting place for what some of those concerns may be, and I think would be something that you would want to dig into and kind of validate and explore on your own. If you think that, yes, I think there is baggage and we have an idea of what that may be in some of that baggage, then I think it comes down to looking at your various touch points with your prospective students and perhaps other constituents, and asking, okay, are there opportunities to address some of these things more effectively in our various touch points? One thing that our research showed was we did ask students, we said, hey, when you're attempting to gauge the political climate of a campus, where do you look? And friends and family were kind of top of that list, which makes sense
Mhm.
intuitively, but a close second was your website. Now that
Mm.
was like super interesting to us because we're like, well, most schools right now are like actively avoiding trying to come down decisively on any divisive political issue. They are actively working as hard as they can to remain neutral so they don't run
Yeah.
afoul of either their student body or faculty and staff, or if you're a state school, perhaps like uh, political leaders and other constituents out external to the university. So what are students actually looking at? Well, as best we can tell, it's like context clues on your website. It's
Hmm.
things like, hey, when I pull up your list of programs, do you have a gender studies program? I think for a certain profile of student, they're going to look at that, and that's just going to be a signal about maybe what the political climate on campus is like. But they are going to be looking at other context clues, like who are the kinds of students that are featured in your uh, student stories. What Who's featured in your photography? What kind of events do you have on campus? What do clubs and orgs look like? And I think they're sort of
Hmm.
going through that and informally, to put it in the vernacular of the kids these days, like they're checking out the vibe on campus. Are you giving conservative? Are you giving, sort of lefty blue? Um, and so I think just kind of thoughtfully evaluating it through that lens, and as you look across all of your touch points and kind of consider what might this be signaling one way or the other. And is that what we want to signal? Is that authentic to us? Is that aligned with who we're trying to recruit and what we're all about? Um, so I think one common scenario would be, just to kind of bring this down to reality a little bit. I think one common scenario might be the purplish campus in a red state.
Hmm.
And so this is, I think, for those schools, like most schools across the country, they are actively avoiding, coming down decisively on a given political issue. They're trying to remain as neutral as possible. I think that is prudent and wise, and I got to give it to our college and university presidents. I think for the most part, they're doing a great job on that, and that's a really tricky line
Yeah.
to walk. And I think most schools are doing a really good job on that. So kudos to them. But I think if you are that purplish campus in a red state, you may consider, hey, when students are coming from out of state, are they bringing with them maybe incorrect assumptions about who is successful on campus or what the typical student looks like on campus?
Hmm.
And do we need to do more to reflect who is really successful and accepted and who really belongs on our campus and the type of students we're going after? So I think if you believe that that's a case, well, then that's something you could probably effectively address in your comms flows and your various marketing touch points as it relates to prospective students. I think a completely different scenario, though, would be, and this is a much smaller slice of higher education, but it's an interesting one. I think it's the slice of school that wears its politics on its sleeve and
Hmm.
leans into that. And so there again, it comes down to, what are the campus politics as they relate to our prospective students and the kinds of people we're trying to attract here. And then in that case, your content operation becomes all about doubling down on that and really living out and carrying out that position, whatever it is that you position you're trying to occupy in that space. But again, I think that's a much smaller slice of school, and there's some interesting things we can look into on that front.
Yeah, I want to talk about the Texas A&M example that you sent me, because I just thought that was a fabulous video. Just just in terms of, it's just very well done. I like to say specificity is the enemy of boring, because like when you really, because if you have your schools, like all the schools are going to be like, oh, we believe in diversity, equity, inclusion or something. And
Right.
like my wife she has her own private practice for therapy, but she's also looking for salaried work. And so we're in these like job descriptions, and they're all of them have a little statement at the bottom that's like, we are equal opportunity employers and we believe in diversity, but like no one really says what that means. But I like this Texas A&M example that you sent me, because it's like little micro stories of students and just their personalities, and just the melting pot of just cool things that people are getting to do from all different walks of life at Texas A&M. We'll link to the video, obviously, but talk about that example and why that's a good example for you.
Yeah, yeah. This was a great piece of creative, or actually several pieces that Texas A&M put out. My understanding, it was launched in 2022, and it was part of an overarching campaign called "Where You Belong," and just a very amazing set of videos. I think what I love about it is that, like you said, every school is going to, or most schools are going to put out statements around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. And I think there's value, obviously, in a formal statement, and this is where
Sure.
we formally are. But I think what makes that a video from Texas A&M so magical is that it really is like, tell me you believe in diversity without telling
Yes.
me you believe in diversity. Like, show me. And so,
That's
and
such a
it's
great way
not
of saying
just
that. I've never like put those two together. That TikTok, meme or whatever
yes.
is a perfect way to say how I always advise schools. It's like, show me, don't tell me. It's like, tell me you're this without telling me.
Yes, absolutely. So I think it's really well done. And the more I reflect on that video, I think it is absolutely about the types of students that they're showing, which, on the face of it, on very surface level, yeah. I mean, do they have sort of a diversity across race that they're showing in the videos? Yeah, absolutely. But when you watch the videos, it really isn't about that. It's also about the diversity of interests. It's about the diversity of intellectual pursuit that's happening. It's
Mhm.
about the diversity of sort of clubs and orgs. They have part of that campaign included this really adorable set of interviews with the anime club, and which is
Yes.
not something that I would typically associate with a Texas school.
No.
And and again, that's bad on me, right? I mean, Texas A&M is an enormous university. Of course, they're going to attract a wide range of students with a wide range of interests. So intellectually, I understand that. But when we're talking about gut level associations of what I think I'm
Right.
going to find at a Texas school, that is not the first thing that comes to mind. Uh, they also have this just completely adorable video of this woman of color who is a judge, but she is also hilarious and just has this incredible personality that comes forth in the video. And you're like, man, you walk away watching those videos going like, wow, there really is a place for me. But they don't. I mean, yes, the campaign is called Where You Belong, but that's about as ham-handed as it gets. And the rest is like
Yeah.
just kind of implied. Like, you will find your people here. And what I also love about it is that the production value, and I think you'll appreciate this, John. I really felt like the production value supported that message. It was
Yes.
uh now I'm not a cinematographer, but I really felt like it was kind of done in this playful Wes
Wes
Anderson-esque
Anderson. That's what I
sort
was
of
gonna say.
shot where you've got these symmetrical shots, and
Yeah.
it's a it's a little sterile in some ways, but very human, and just this thread of humor and joy that kind of flows throughout the whole thing. And but it's all at the same time also kind of poetic and interesting. So um, I love that. I think that's a very effective piece of communication,
Yeah.
and something that I think most schools would have been proud to put out.
Yeah, and I've been talking a lot lately on other podcasts and on this podcast about short form video and how, just get out your phone, like you don't have to do this. And like, I have a vested interest in people investing in, cinematic production, because that's what we do at Unveiled. I've also just been really embracing like this lo-fi approach. And I feel like that's a great example of where a cinematic approach actually will amplify the message. So I think, and I was thinking about this yesterday because I'm putting together this report on what's working in higher ed video, and I came across some videos that were like, Hillsdale College is one that you mentioned. We might talk about that one,
Hmm.
where already good content paired with a high production value is just a recipe for really good performance. It just takes something that's already engaging and makes it more engaging. I don't
Hmm.
think What I don't think is helpful is a boring concept or a boring video that's really well lit, or like
Right.
your camera is like flying around on a gimbal or there's drone shots everywhere. It's just like that's like lipstick on a pig. But if you have something that is already a really good story. So your example, Texas A&M, is great example, and I thought that was a perfect way to show diversity. And for people listening that can't picture it, it's just like these little micro like anecdotes from different students, dressed in there's that one scene you were mentioning dressed in cosplay, which is like they're dressed as like anime characters in like full costume, and then one of them who you don't expect to say she's studying law. Like,
Hmm.
you expect
Yep.
her to say she's studying like art or something like that, but she's like, I'm really interested in law. um and so you get these diverse perspectives, but I think the production value also just adds to it. It just adds this level of like really like keeps you watching a little longer. And Hillsdale College is one of those that I think leans into um their beliefs about the way that the world works. But separate from that, they have these free courses that are just really interesting courses on the Bible and on history and things like that. But in paired, they have one that's went really viral. It's got like 20 million views with about like the Genesis story or something like that. And paired with this really high production value, I think that like really helps it go viral. So I think that's just worth noting when you have something that's when you have a presentation that's already good, pairing that with a high production value is really helpful.
Yeah, and I think regardless of what anybody, if you know Hillsdale College, regardless of what you think about their politics, there's a lot you can learn from them if in terms of positioning and in terms of like living that out in your content production. I mean, John, what you're saying about their content, yeah, it's like masterclass level production
Yes.
values, but it's on topics. Some of them are, I think all the topics are squarely aimed at like who their identity as an institution and who they want to be and the type of student they want to attract. And from what I understand, it actually has paid off quite handsomely in terms of their recruitment efforts. They've
Hmm.
been filling their classes and becoming increasingly more selective by sort of doubling down on their position as a conservative institution and a sort of a home for conservative thought. So
Hmm.
I think, what I would expect is that when you narrow down like that, like you will have your audience. Uh,
Yeah.
Potentially. I think, but I think most schools are not that and are actually actively trying to do the opposite, but it is an interesting one and one that you can learn a lot from. And John, you kind of reminded me, I think part of what Hillsdale is doing is they are leveraging their faculty and bringing faculty forward
Yeah.
and sort of reinforcing that. I think another example that is very different though is there's a YouTube channel called Soch 119, and it is a Penn State professor who runs the largest class on race and culture in the United States. It's a huge like auditorium class, and for years he has been publishing every lecture from every semester uh, on YouTube on their channel. And and they dive headlong into the most controversial topics of the day. Like if there's a third rail around race and culture, they're going to grab it.
Mm.
And but what I think is so cool about that, and I think it's worth noting, I don't think this is an effort from like big Penn State marketing. I think this is a professor who wanted to publish his lectures out there.
Yeah.
But what is so cool about it is if you sit down and you watch those lectures, he exemplifies this notion of I'm not going to tell you what exactly to think. I'm just going to help you think better, more critically about the world around you and how you're forming the opinions that you are.
Hmm.
And we're going to use these really controversial issues of the day to go into it. And I think he is, kind of straightforward about his politics at times. Like, hey, look, I'm a professor. I'm kind of left leaning, but that's not my point. I'm not trying to get you to buy into any
Yeah.
particular dogmatic point of view. I just want you to be really thoughtful and critical about the world around you. And what is interesting to me about that is how much traction that has picked up from a wider audience out on YouTube. And I think lots of folks from across the political spectrum, you see those videos come through your feed and you're like, oh, I got to watch this. And what you get pulled into is this really thoughtful discourse, and you see young people really struggling to articulate a point of view and grapple with some really heady stuff. And it's like super interesting. I think that's another example. Like you don't, I'm in no way saying you need to follow the Hillsdale model and like occupy a position and get your faculty on to talk
Yeah.
about that. No, that's like unique to them and maybe a handful of select schools that are like that. but
Yeah.
I think that Soch 119 model is like more interesting, and
Yeah.
probably has done, I would guess, has done a lot to maybe change some opinions about what some people think is happening in college classrooms right now, particularly
Yeah.
around these really divisive issues.
I love that. My 9-year-old daughter is asking really good questions about politics because she's seeing these commercials on TV, and about, we see them. You see both sides. You see the anti Kamala commercials that she's letting all these people into the country and she's a terrible person, and the other side, Donald Trump's a terrible person, and blah blah blah. And she's like, I don't know. And like, her mom and I are very we're pretty moderate, and so we're not really pushing one side or the other. But we had these conversations with her last week because she got into this political discussion with my mother-in-law, who's very far on one side,
Mhm.
and
That's always fun.
yeah. And so we were kind of like,
We'll
listen,
have something to talk about in the car on the way home.
let's maybe not talk about politics with a 9-year-old. uh but uh but I told her, I'm like, you know what, I was like, who cares what me and mom think? Like, let's look at the facts, at like what each side thinks, and like you decide. And I think that's a really I think we just need more of that. More people just rethinking the narrative around what they're being told from one TV station or another. But I
I tell
like that
you,
approach.
one of the big takeaways for me personally, uh, coming after authoring this report, was just reinforcing the importance and value of what great higher education can do for people. I know
Hmm.
that a liberal arts education was absolutely transformative in my life, and that I left not only knowing more about a handful of topics, but a more thoughtful, intellectually aware, critical thinker. And that was transformative. And so, yeah, I think when you look at some of the what is actually happening in a lot of classrooms across the country, and you think about the polarization in our country, we desperately need those professors who are teaching young people how to grapple with really difficult ideas, and to engage with people across significant differences, and do that in a way that's productive. So I my co-author on the report, Grant DeRue, he and I just recorded a podcast where we chatted about the results of the report. And one thing he said is, he's like, I absolutely, we want higher ed to be a safe environment for people, but I think that does not mean comfort. It does not have to mean I'm perfectly comfortable at all times. And he and I are both kind of aligned on the fact of, like, if you are sitting in a college classroom and you are 100% comfortable at all times with the content that is being discussed, that school probably isn't doing its job. That's not what you're there to do.
Yeah.
um, and showing and really guiding young people to say, hey, it's okay to grapple with things that are uncomfortable ideas, and really dig into those things. Like, that's part of the experience. That's what's going to make you grow. um, so along those lines, it does take me to another school that I would like to point out, and that's the University of Chicago, which I think a lot of folks might be familiar with, sort of their principles for free expression that a lot of other schools have adopted.
Hmm.
And I think this is sort of an interesting take in our political environment. Um, Setting aside the fact of whether, we could say that free expression in and of itself is a political issue. Setting that aside, what is interesting about the University of Chicago is they are essentially saying, hey, we're not trying to land hard on any particular issue, um, but we are in support of free expression. And here's what we want that culture of free expression to be like on campus. And here's why that's significant to our academic environment and to our university. Um, so this is an area where they have come out and sort of explicitly said, this is what we want, this is what we're going after. You can look up their principles of free expression. It's on their website, easy to get to. If you go to their YouTube channel, you will see some videos in their admissions uh, video content that actually does talk about this free expression, which I think is really cool. And I think maybe, I definitely don't want to armchair quarterback what I think schools should do, but I think there may be an opportunity for more schools to be more forward about the culture of discourse on campus and what they want that to be like. And so,
Yeah.
perhaps there are opportunities within those comms flow and the marketing touch points that prospective students are encountering, to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So tell me what's as we wrap up here, what's like the give us like one final thought. Like what's the bottom line? What would you advise our audience with?
Oh man. Well, kind of circle back to just the big finding. Politics matters, and it matters a lot for a select handful of students. So I think one thing that particularly really good admissions folks are just great about is really understanding the students that they're trying to recruit on a deep level. And so I think this report just gives them one more tool to understand what may be going on with some of their students, and to think about that in a little more concrete terms, and hopefully have a little path forward. So I would just encourage folks to check it out. And I think it's probably something useful for a lot of folks in it.
Awesome. Love it. Well, this has been fun, man. Where can people connect with you at?
Yeah. So echodelta.co is sort of the home for our podcast and all of our blog and research stuff. So I would definitely encourage folks to go check out our website, echodelta.co. And then I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So Jarrett Smith, Jarrett Smith. I think my actual LinkedIn URL is Smith Jarrett, and people always comment. They're like, "Oh, that's like Sex in the City." I don't know. I never watched it, but maybe there's like 3 people listening that can read. They're like, "Oh yeah."
Cool. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, definitely check out Echo Delta. Check out the Higher Ed Marketing Lab. This great episode that you have with Grant on there about this. More of this. Unpacking of this report, so definitely people go check that out. And yeah, man, Jarrett, thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
John, thank you so much, man. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening. 3 things I want to give you before you go. Number 1, reminder to sign up for my free weekly newsletter, all about creating content that resonates emotionally with your audience. And you can do that at unveiled.tv/newsletter. Unveiled is spelled UNVEILD. Number 2, if you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Share it with your team, your boss, your dog, whatever. And if you're not already subscribed, I'd love for you to do that. Number 3, reach out to me if you have comments, questions, you want to talk about a video project, whatever. My email is john@unveiled.tv. John is spelled JOHN. Or follow me on LinkedIn. If you're searching for me, my last name is spelled AZONI. That's all for today, and I look forward to catching you on the next episode of the Higher Ed Storytelling University podcast. Thanks.